they have this acting room where you could film yourself and videotape.
Simple, elegant, yet bored. You will die.
The playwright sleeps to make him smarter because leading experts say Mozart makes babies smarter.
Just a little workout. This is for you.
I always knew you were tough, but tricking the probe by hiding under the bones of another super? Oh, man! I'm still geeking out about it.
And then you just, why do you have to just go and stink so, you just had to smell so, stinks.
There's a real trick that we're going to have to somehow conquer on this film, and it's not an easy thing. I mean, we've done this talk in animation already. How do you show that somebody's strong, and yet something is genuinely heavy?
Yeah, there's a big push at the beginning of this film with Brad and Tony and Steve really getting us to think about weight, and by videotaping, I think it pushes you past what you would normally think, and it makes you more of a student of particularly weight. It's a great means to have, because everything we do is so labor intensive, it kind of gives you that improvisational first spark that then you can use to reference what you're going to use in your acting or in your action.
He would show animation where he didn't think the weight was very believable, and he had a real chip on his shoulder about this being very believable, so that you could feel the peril. And he would show stuff like Hajira, the jaguar, pushing Mowgli up into the tree in Jungle Book. On one hand, you could say, oh, this is old school, we're the future and that's the past, that's traditional animation, but the physics of that are so exquisite.
We had, I think, this bag of tricks as animators for bipedal characters. We'd all carried around with us, even ever since Toy Story 1. It wasn't until we had done the first few tests that we had realized that it's a completely different language. I think for most animators it takes a good month or two of pretty intense stuff to really get into understanding what makes a fish feel like a fish and adapting their old bag of tricks to the new bag of tricks. One thing I always equate it to is animating fish is like animating toilet paper underwater, but like muscular toilet paper. It's so loose and smooth everywhere, but then muscularly driven that's a hard thing to do.
One of the first lectures I gave was on how fish move, and I was sort of amazed to get called back just 2 days later to sort of look over some of the things that they had dummied up based on my lecture. And this fellow was showing me how the fish moved and everything. I said, they can't move their pectoral fins like that. That won't look right. A fish can't just sort of do that. He said, you know, Adam, fish don't talk.
If you look at fish, it's amazing how little we did have to caricature them, because they're so wild in their shapes and forms.
They took a lot of scientific input, but there are some things you just have to do in order to act that fish don't do.
Real fish have the eyes on the side of the head. They don't have eyelids, and they don't blink, and they don't talk. So how do you design a fish that is able to talk and emote and everything that the animators are going to want to put in there? We looked at how dogs emote. The subtle movements of their eyebrows is enough to emote like sadness or happiness.
Neutral.
Excited. Angry.
Stern.
Sad.
And it's the same thing with these fish designs. We put enough eyebrow mass in there to really get the nuances of emotion. So I basically now have to flesh that design out, start figuring out the details about the fins and the gills and the mouth and the teeth, and turn her around, draw her from so many different angles.
Hi, I'm Glenn Keane. I'm the supervising animator for Tarzan. What you're about to see are scenes, rough animation, the exploratory drawings, the process that we go through in developing a character like Tarzan. There's a whole evolution that an idea goes through from beginning to end. You look at the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo didn't start by just immediately painting on the ceiling. He first had to do his studies before he could jump into it. The same with animation. We went to Africa, we studied how animals move, we studied sculptures, anatomy. One of the things I loved about working in Paris was the chance to ride my bike and discover things along the way, like this statue by Dalou in the Place de la Nation. There's a man riding this lion, and when I went around this statue, I thought, that's Tarzan. So we started to do drawings based on what we saw from that sculpture and other studies of anatomy. We brought in the professor of anatomy from the École des Beaux-Arts. I did these drawings in pencil. He went over the muscles in red. We found that this costume that Tarzan was wearing was going to be the most complicated of all. It was the first time we'd ever animated actually a functioning human anatomy. One of the first exercises that we did was assigning for each animator to study an animal movement and transpose that into Tarzan. That's what we're going to take a look at here. So the very first test, these don't really look like Tarzan as much because this was our first attempt, but they were experimenting with how Tarzan would move as an animal. One, it's an animation here. This is not exactly on model Tarzan. It was his first attempt, but there was something nice about the way he clears his hair out of his eyes, I felt. Here Christophe had been studying how monkeys clean off the bugs off of each other's hair and felt like, hey, why not have Tarzan do that? You know, to him it's not unusual. Christophe, in this scene, he was studying how basketball players hang on the hoop, and it was just a real fun fluidity and natural rhythm to this movement. At the same time, with the animal feel that he's comfortable on all fours, and it just had this great freshness and spontaneity to his movement. It was important that Tarzan be able to move on all fours in a convincing way, and in a way that didn't make him feel like the family dog, that there was a spring to his step. The way he can climb up and use his feet for climbing had to be natural. Here, Thierry has got Tarzan moving through the vines with baboons. The poses are like monkeys moving through the trees. We were discovering just how far you could go with Tarzan and still have him be believable. In this scene, Eric's animation shows Tarzan stretching and waking up in the morning. He's on this tree, but it's the surprise that instead of just using his hands, his feet are just as dexterous. In this scene, David Berthier was solving a problem that I felt we were going to have, is how can Tarzan stand upright on two legs and not feel like just a regular human guy? And he kept this animal feeling to Tarzan. The added bit with the soap and Tarzan's innocence was a little bit of a revelation that we were going to be able to have a lot of fun with Tarzan. In Zoltan's animation here, how an animal wakes up and stretches combined with how a human stretches is the beauty of this scene. In this scene, I wanted to play the curious side of Tarzan. He finds this little perfume bottle, doesn't know what it is. And I wanted to see if you can take a gorilla sound and have it actually feel like it's coming out of Tarzan. Would it seem too big, too loud, too deep and rich? Or does Tarzan actually, can he support that kind of sound? These are study sketches that I did preparing for a scene where I wanted Tarzan to be playing with the gorillas, thinking that, hey, like the chimpanzee, he could be doing this almost like they spin around, almost on their head. It's like a top. So the rough animation is based on these sketches. So when Tarzan has all the gorillas on his back, he does what's natural to him in spinning around like a chimpanzee. There's an energy that you get when you do your first rough animation. These are the very first rough tests of Tarzan sliding down this little roller coaster of a jungle with Jane in his arms. I had noticed that in front of Notre Dame, the way the rollerbladers would go between these Coke cans, they had this fun little movement with his feet. And I thought, why not have Tarzan to be able to do this? So we actually built the branches so that Tarzan's feet could be going back and forth as if they're going through the Coke cans. And I think it worked great. The animal movements that Tarzan has are fun to watch, but we really relate to Tarzan because of the human emotions he shows. Here's a sequence where you see Tarzan in the treehouse where he discovers his roots.
Is this me?
These scenes, for me, are often the most difficult because you are trying to express such emotions that you feel yourself and you've experienced in your own life I remember animating these scenes feeling the same emotions Tarzan was going through. And all you can do sometimes is just press harder on your pencil to try to make the drawing express what you're feeling in your heart, and you hope that the audience can feel it as they're looking at it. The scene where Tarzan meets Jane face to face is a moment where he discovers someone like him. You have to express it in the eyes, and I tried to find a moment in my own life when I had seen and discovered somebody like myself for the first time. And I remember my daughter Claire being born, 30 seconds old. The doctor puts her in my hand, and I looked, and it was like a mirror. I could see myself. And I told Claire, when you see this scene, Claire, that's not Tarzan looking at Jane, that's me looking at you. These are the things that make Disney animation real for us, is taking our own life and trying to put that up onto the screen so the audience feels it like we did.
Miyazaki's characters sometimes reach beyond the sense of vision, like the stink spirit, a dripping mess of a creature.
You know motion pictures don't have smell, but boy, if it did.
This way. My shoes are gone.
It's not just Miyazaki's unique vision that other animators admire. It's also his realism, which is a product of his attention to detail.
There's a scene where Chihiro puts her feet into her shoe. And it would just be a very simple scene. You might just animate it, and she puts her shoes on and moves, runs off. But he's observed the way a real little girl does it. She doesn't just put her feet in her shoes. She makes sure that it's snug and tight. And in this scene, you can see her kind of tap her toes into there, and then she goes running off. And it's these little just magic moments that convince you that this is not an imaginary world. This is real.
You have to hold your breath while we cross the bridge. Even the tiniest breath will break the spell, and then everyone will see you.
Of course this film is fantasy. Of course, it's a complete fabrication. But within the context of that fabricated reality, I feel like I didn't lie to the kids.
Hold it.
These arbitrary imaginary rules and that business of holding your breath, and your life depends on it, you know, rings terribly true to children, but not to adults.
Whenever I go to see a movie that I've worked on here, and it's complete, and I'm sitting there in the audience and I say, oh, there's my shot. Oh, I should have pushed that more. On this film, they really pushed me to push myself, especially in the Bob and Helen argument. I think I got pushed more as an animator than I've ever been pushed in my life. And I really appreciate that they felt that I could take it to that next level of, like, you know, really polishing it and really pushing the mouth shapes, pushing the expressions, pushing the eyes, and pushing that organic softness in the face. All these things that later, when I look at my shots, inevitably I say, ah, I should have pushed that more. And I think this time they made me push it to that place where I really want to be.
They're finally recognizing your talents. You're moving up.
Yes.
Honey. Oh, this is wonderful.
Yes, it is.
How is Bob feeling in the scene? How is Bob feeling in the sequence? How is Bob feeling over the whole movie? And it needs to mesh there. Now, Brad's job is to say...
You have to kind of work to keep the shapes more simplified.
Okay.
The corners tend to come up, and then come down and up again. And you just want to simplify those shapes. So then instead of like, like that, you can just kind of...
An explosive charge or something?
Yeah, it's...
Okay.
Boom, 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 boom. Like that. So that we have white all the way around the pupils. Eyebrows going like this. And then kind of, ah! So it's like, then we cut.
The character that you play, Matt Damon, who's based on a real character, Mark Whitaker, who was the whistleblower on ADM and a price-fixing conspiracy, he once he decides to talk to the FBI and wear a wire, part of that process drives him crazy, but part of the process is really seductive to him because, he's seen the movie, he's seen The Firm, he's watched the James Bond films, he kids that he's 0014 because he's twice as good as 007. Since you've been in a series of spy films, the Bourne Identity films, what was it like for you to play somebody who wants to be that character and isn't?
It was a lot of fun. It was the opposite of doing the Bourne movies. Yeah, I think it was always something that I thought was interesting about the character, that he did enjoy. He did see himself as embroiled in the middle of this this drama, and he did constantly refer to Michael Crichton novels, and the character actually became addicted to the movie The Firm and saw himself as Tom Cruise in The Firm, and he would go and he would tell his wife he was going one place, and he'd go back to the multiplex and sit there and watch The Firm. So there is that aspect of the character that was of him that was enjoying the work that he was doing. But on the other hand, he was taking extraordinary risks. He was doing really courageous things, gathering all this evidence. But ultimately, his lawyer, one of the defenses they used was, look, these FBI agents go out and do undercover work, and they're trained for it, and they crack. And here's a guy with absolutely no training who went out there for 2.5 years, and obviously when he was diagnosed as being bipolar, they realized that all of this pressure that he was under was just exacerbating that, and he started to deteriorate, pretty quickly by the end.
Can you talk a little bit about how you stand or walk or move differently as Jason Bourne in a genuine spy thriller, and as Mark Whitaker in The Informant, somebody who is an executive at ADM but is wearing a wire and really wants to be the spy kind of thriller person but isn't?
Yeah, to me, the whole, the way you walk and the way you stand and the way you sit, those are things I think a lot about, and always come out of hours and hours and hours of whatever kind of training or research I'm doing. In the case of the Bourne movies, one of the examples I use is that character always stands angled off on whoever he's talking to, because the guy who was teaching me how to handle all these weapons out in the desert in L.A. was a former SWAT shotgunner, and he always stood angled off to me. And I realized it after I'd spent like a couple hundred hours with him, and I said, why are you always standing like that? I mean, is it to present less of an angle or something? He said, well, it's that, but really I just do it out of habit because I wear my gun on this hip, and I always keep my body between whoever I'm talking to and my gun. So I'm convinced that there are thousands of little things like that are signals that, when you look at a movie and sometimes you walk out and I'll say to someone, hey, did you like that performance of that, whatever. And a lot of times somebody will say, yeah, no, I didn't, not really. And I'd say, well, why? And they go, I don't know. I don't know. I just, and they can't quite put their finger on it, but I'm convinced that there are hundreds of little details and little signals that you're sending to somebody who's watching the performance that add up to make a performance believable or not. And so I geek out on that stuff all the time and think about that stuff. And, in the case of this movie, putting on the weight and, a bunch of the external things really helped. The wardrobe, the wig I was wearing, the mustache. I had plumping things in my cheeks that the dentist made for me. A nose thing on the end of my nose, because Stephen was convinced that the character shouldn't have any hard edges at all. He should look kind of hard to define, hard to pin down. And when your body changes and you feel clothes hitting certain parts of your body they don't normally hit, and it just affects everything. It's like a kind of a way to immerse yourself into that other guy.
So if in the Bourne Identity you stood at an angle when talking to people to separate your gun, to put your body between your gun and the person you're talking to, how did you stand as Mark Whitaker in The Informant when you were talking to people?
Just right, straight facing somebody, like a guy who's got nothing to hide.
Woo! That was fun!
On the production, we have what are called shot briefings for the animators. And to be honest, all that is a fancy word for what all directors do with actors. You may be talking about what your character's motivation is, or simply, you need to be swimming here, and you suddenly have to be at this point in the frame by the shot's over. Whatever the actor needs to make the scene work.
I remember it. I do. It's there. I know it is, because when I look at you,
I can feel it. And I look at you and I'm home.
I can say to you, she realizes she doesn't want to be lonely anymore. I don't think she's that articulate, and she understands even that clearly. But I think she's felt it. She just hasn't formed it, right? So it's like forming as she's saying it, right? So she's like, if you leave, you know, it's like basically I will be lonely. But she doesn't even know that yet. She's just like it's going to be bad, right?
There's definitely acting that comes from the voice talent, but it's really people's ability to get inside of that character. You have to know all about it in order to bring a character to life. Otherwise, the character's not alive, it's just moving.
I locked the door, I closed the door, and I put up some pictures of different people or things in my life that were important to me that are gone now, and kind of put myself in that moment for a while, and it was a depressing day. But, and then after a while, after I was really kind of in the moment, I looped the dialogue, and I kind of went with it, and then I turned on my little computer camera here.
And I look at you and I'm home.
So working from that has been a great help, and hopefully, since it's coming from a sincere place in me, when it's coming out of Dory in the film, it'll feel like it's coming from a sincere place from her as well.
It's almost like when you show your shot, you're naked, and you can't hide behind anything.
So yeah, I haven't shown it to Andrew yet.
It's there. I know it is, because when I look at you, I can feel it. And I look at you and I'm home.
She comes across more collected than I think we want her to come across as. My initial response is that you have to have a little more jerky left and right on top of your stuff at the beginning. Some hint, some tell that it's all falling through her fingers right there as she's talking.
There's a lot of this back and forth that happens, and this super fine tuning, so that you get a really appealing character, and they always feel organic, and they never feel computery.
It feels like he's locked in space, hanging from a hook right here.
Did you try stretching his neck? Just like a half-beat pause. Oh, you know, like there. He just swam. Ooh, scoot, 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 you know? You know?
Just it's like, yeah. If we've done our job, you never sense the technology that's behind it. You just get the art out of it, and you get the entertainment out of it.
I remember it. I do. It's there. I know it is, because when I look at you, I can feel it. And I look at you and I'm home.
Final! Final! Final!